You are listening to the Tricorder Transmissions Special Episode. And now, here are Craig and Jeff.
To episode 0 of the Tricorder Transmissions. I am Craig Cohen.
And I'm Jeff Hewlett.
And what we are going to do with this podcast is sort of unlike any other Star Trek podcast out there.
Where no podcast has gone before.
Very good. We are gonna provide a scene-specific commentary for every episode of Star Trek: The Original Series. Now, when I say that, it's not to say that you can't listen to this show as a standalone podcast.
Right, absolutely.
But if you'd like to, you can queue up your episode. We're going to give you a nice 3 count, and then you can watch the episode along as we talk about it. Now, a lot of times we'll reference stuff that's going on the screen, but other times we'll get into side discussions where we talk about either the writers, directors, stars, guest stars, anything that, that might seem interesting to us while we're watching the episode.
Yeah, so we're going to bring some facts, some interesting side notes, and we'll bring some discussion about the philosophies of that particular episode or how they fit into the Trek universe or don't fit in some cases. So we're going to have a lot to talk about during these episodes.
Yeah, and one thing that I'm actually looking forward to is watching every episode of Star Trek: The Original Series, because as much as I've been a fan for a long time, I'm not 100% sure that I've seen every episode of the series. And I guess counting the cage, there are 80. But after we are done with this podcast, I can definitively say I have seen every episode of Star Trek: The Original Series. Because, I'm sure there are episodes here that both of us have seen maybe once. I know you recently started watching the series.
Yeah, I finally broke down, after many years. I've been a fan for, I can't even remember how long.
Well, that is funny, not to sidetrack us,
no.
I was thinking that there were probably 3 things in my life, aside from, the obvious things. 3 things that have been constant in my life.
Okay.
Not meaning that I was always a fan, but it was something I was aware of. One of those is Star Trek.
Oh, all right.
The other is the James Bond film franchise.
Yep, I know of your fondness for Bond.
And the third and final one is the rock band Kiss.
Oh, yeah, yep.
Those are all things that I cannot remember a time in my life when those were not something I was aware of.
Wow.
I remember as a kid, me and my brother were probably playing with the Star Trek Mego action figures.
The taller ones.
Yeah,
the taller ones.
Before we were even watching the show in syndication. So... before we got sidetracked, you said you were recently started watching the entire series.
Oh, sure, yeah. So, I finally broke down, I've lived through every release of this show in every format that it's been commercially released to the public in. So VHS, I really loathe the way they released this show on VHS.
Well, yeah, they put out
two at a time.
Two per cassette. I remember I'd go to my local Suncoast.
Yep.
And they would be like $12.99.
Yeah.
So it wouldn't be cheap to collect the whole series.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
And that turned me off. And I there are many times I had the DVD set in my hands. But the price was prohibitive to me at the time. It was at the time I was, of course, I've always been working, but the expenditure was a little too much for me to justify, on my current salary at the time. So I just couldn't bring myself to buy the DVD set. So finally, not long ago, I happened to see the Blu-ray release of all 3 seasons on Amazon for an outrageously low price. And I just immediately pulled the trigger. I said, I've got to do this. And, it turned out to be probably the best case scenario for buying this series that you could come into in the current state of ownable media.
Yeah, physical media. The cool thing about this release is they put out the original DVDs in probably 2003, 2004, somewhere around there, or at least the complete seasons. And they were the original broadcast episodes.
Right.
Shortly after that, they started remastering the episodes.
Yep.
And then they put out remastered versions.
Yep. That was in the late 2000s. Yeah.
The great thing about this Blu-ray release is every episode you have the original episode as aired.
Yep.
And then the remastered version. So for the people that are purists or completists, you now have both versions of every episode of Star Trek: The Original Series, which is what also finally made me pull the trigger, because I had bought the first season on DVD and spent probably $90 for it.
Yeah, that was too much for me.
And when 2 came out, I said, you know what? I haven't even gone through all these episodes yet. I can't drop down another $90 to watch season 2.
Yeah.
So the other cool thing, though, is there are so many ways to watch Star Trek, even for free now, or for a monthly subscription. If you have Netflix, the episodes are available on Netflix,
Amazon Prime, I think.
Amazon Prime, and then even if you go to StarTrek.com, a majority of the original series episodes are available to stream for free.
That's pretty cool.
So the one thing we do have to point out, though, is our commentary tracks. We are watching commercial-free versions.
Yes. So yeah, be careful if you're watching a version that has commercials, because you'll get out of sync.
Yeah.
If you're trying to watch along with us, so we would recommend
pausing.
Or
watching.
Netflix is commercial free, Amazon is commercial free, and of course, any physical media that you can get the remastered versions on will be commercial free.
Oh, and that's another interesting thing to bring up. You could even watch the non-remastered version, because really, with the exception of the enhanced effects, they didn't do anything to alter
the length of the episode,
the flow of the episode. They weren't re-edited. I think these remasters were done about as good as you could, because they didn't really compromise the show, in the sense that they didn't really do anything that looked out of place.
Yeah, I think at this point in our episode 0, while we're talking about the show, I think it might be a good idea for us to just mention why or our position on the remasters, because it's kind of a controversial thing. Some of the fan base out there is not too fond of the remasters. I know a couple of people who are avid Trek fans that were pretty anti-remaster, and I also know a couple of people. My uncle, a couple of guys I work with who are very pro remaster,
who were probably around when the show originally aired.
They were around the show aired. Yes, they were. And I would say I'm definitely pro remaster. After having watched most of them, I think that they did it in a really tasteful way. And I understand how it could chaff some of the real fans out there. It's kind of got that Lucas type of thing, but I don't think that the remastering of the effects in these episodes is really directly comparable to the alterations that, say, Lucas had made to the original Star Wars trilogy, in that he actually changed some of the continuity and changed some of the events in those movies. Whereas these effects they've changed here were cleaning things up, doing the CGI versions of the ships and some of the space effects in some of the episodes that have space combat in them. And I think that the guys that did that work treated the source material with a lot of respect. Yeah. I think they were fans of the series, and I don't think they went overboard with it. And in fact, the funny thing was that my fiance, who had really not been exposed to the original series in any capacity other than seeing, maybe Wrath of Khan and the voyage home. Yeah. I was watching some of these episodes when she was around, and she didn't even realize that those effects were not part of the original show until I told her. Yeah. And she was surprised to hear it.
Yeah. They didn't really make any attempt to make the show look like it wasn't filmed in the 60s. So, I mean, I really think that, the main difference between these restored and remastered versions of Star Trek versus Star Wars is the point you already brought up, where they didn't change anything from the continuity.
Yep.
And And the other thing is, unless you've sat down and watched the original broadcast episode, you might not even notice some of these changes. I mean, I've noticed some of them are really, really subtle. You know, they've gone from like sort of an analog style, you know, clock type readout to a digital one. And unless you're thinking, hey, I'm watching a remastered version, you don't even think about it. So I think it's really easy to watch these remastered versions and not realize, you know, that you're seeing updated effects. Whereas with, I'm a Star Wars fan. I'm sure we'll talk about Star Wars a lot over the course of this series. But one of the things with the 97 special editions of Star Trek or Star Wars, and even beyond 97, is anytime that there was something new, you noticed it.
You did. You absolutely noticed it right off the bat, and sometimes with a jarring effect.
Yeah. So I talked a little bit about how Star Trek has sort of been in my life for as long as I can remember. What is sort of your Star Trek experience like?
Oh, man. I have so many great memories about this show. So, not to get too personal, but when I was younger, I was a child of a single mom. So, and she worked a lot. She was a retail person. She worked in a lot of nights. And fortunately for me, I had grandparents and an uncle, my mother's twin brother, Uncle Kurt, who would hang out with me at night and take care of me. And Kurt, fantastic guy. You know, we've been close all my life. I used to hang out with him, on those nights when I was younger. And this was in the 70s when Star Trek was in syndication. And, my uncle and a family friend of ours, Jeremy, a friend of his, were really, really rabid Star Trek fans back then. And by virtue of hanging out with them a lot as a young child, I would be watching these episodes with them. And I when I was little, of course, it was fascinating because they're in outer space and you get to see aliens and spaceships and laser beams and all kinds of stuff. But as I grew up, I grew to really love the characters in the series, and it really became a part of my life in a lot of different ways. I've always been a pretty outspoken Star Trek fan. As a teenager, usually branded as a nerd. In high school, I was a nerd, geek, what have you. And, I was the guy that had the Star Trek lunchbox and, I had, the Star Trek book cover on my math book and what have you. So, it really stayed with me for a lot of years. And another really great thing when I was younger is that my uncle took me to movies when I was a little kid. So I got to see, in 1977, I sat in theater and saw Star Wars. I saw Star Trek the Motion Picture, The Wrath of Khan, I saw Empire Strikes Back. So I got to see all of these movies when they were actually released in the theaters. So to me, that was a really great memory, and it really helped temper my appreciation, especially for Star Trek. So for deep history for me.
Yeah, it's kind of cool how certain things, you assume that you would probably have liked them or loved them, developing sort of an interest in them on your own. But when you're introduced to something sort of like Star Trek or even like Kiss,
right?
It was like, that's music that I would have eventually found myself listening to anyway.
Right.
But when you're sort of born into it, it's interesting that, it sort of speeds up the process a little bit.
Sure does.
Yeah. It's cool that, I think one of the interesting things about, doing this podcast for me was, we're both Star Trek fans.
Yeah.
We haven't really sat down and ever had extended conversations about Trek before. I mean,
no,
it was
we've
sort
had
of
passing conversations.
Sort of a shared interest. So this is going to be a really cool opportunity for me and you to hang out, watch Star Trek, talk about Star Trek, and really probably maybe also surprise each other with what we find out about certain episodes.
Yeah.
Which should be neat as well. So just to talk a little bit of the format.
Sure.
So we will be providing commentary tracks for the episodes. But before the episode, we'll each week probably have a 5 to 10 minute long sort of conversation, maybe touch on maybe something interesting that happened during the week, or maybe even news related to Star Trek. Who knows? It could be sort of a potpourri, if you will,
Yeah.
before we get into the episode proper. And then we'll give you a 3 count.
Sure.
And then we'll be in the episode. And again, as I said earlier, you can watch along, queue up, watch along. And if you don't want to watch the episode or you don't have the ability to, we think that the conversation won't be so scene specific that you couldn't get enjoyment from it.
Yeah, we're not just going to run, we're not going to say, oh, here comes Kirk, he's walking through a door, he's talking to Uhura.
Yeah.
It's not going to be like that. There will be some times where we'll point out things on the screen or like, oh, check out that prop that was used in this episode or whatnot. Or, we'll talk about things like that or the technology that's being shown or the medical procedures that McCoy is doing. But we're not going to tie our conversation specifically to every little bit of scene action that's going on, so that you'll be able to actually hang out and listen to us talk about these shows without having to actually watch along if you don't have the facility to do that or you don't feel like it.
And one other thing to mention is we will be, and I think most of the episodes are presented in their original broadcast order.
Yeah, we're doing the broadcast order.
Yeah, so I know if you have the Blu-ray set, or even I think the way they're run on Netflix, is they're all done in the production order, or I'm sorry, the running order.
The running order, yeah.
So the early episodes, we're going to be talking about episodes that were sort of shot in maybe before each other.
Yeah.
But we're going to be watching it the way people watched it back in '66.
Yeah, exactly. I think that's actually a really great way to do it. I like the way that we're doing it that way, and I think it'll make for an interesting experience in that you'll be seeing things that you'll think, why is this happening now?
Yeah.
We haven't seen any history of this before. Yeah. So you will be able to experience what people experienced when they were first watching this show.
Yeah. And one other interesting thing we're going to do, which I don't know of any other Star Trek centric podcast has done.
Yeah.
And a lot of the Star Trek people out there would say, why are you doing this? Is we are going to determine episode by episode, season by season, what episodes are essential viewing. Meaning that if you want to watch a condensed version of Star Trek at some point, what episodes are mandatory viewing in our opinion, and what episodes can you skip? And when I say essential, we're really basically talking about major continuity moments, or major character moments. So that'll be interesting too, to sit here and watch them and try to determine what's essential and what's not. And I think we agreed upon that we both have to agree something's essential for it to be essential. So if we have a split vote, it will not make the list.
On our website, though, the tricordertransmissions.com, we're going to keep a running list of which episodes we both agree on, which ones we disagree on. So you'll be able to run down the list as our episodes are appearing online and see which ones Craig said yes to or which ones I said no to and vice versa. So we'll have a running tally. So it'll be interesting to see how that builds up over time and where we fall.
Excellent. And as of right now, as of this recording, we are probably going to post a brand new episode for you people to enjoy every Sunday.
I think every Sunday is going to be the day.
All right. So for the foreseeable future, every Sunday, there will be an episode to download or sync up, however you enjoy podcasts. There will be an episode of the Tricorder Transmissions, and assuming we're not sick of each other after 79, 80 episodes, we are going to tackle the animated series as well.
And complete the 5-year mission, as it were.
Yes. So it's very exciting. We're at the beginning of this journey. Thank you to anybody who's on board with us already.
Thanks a lot.
And thank you to anybody who might have discovered this episode in the future.
We have no idea how far in the future people will discover this, but hopefully we'll be reaching some cool people, and you'll be able to take this journey with us, because it won't be referenceable by time base. So whenever you start up, you can start up and follow through.
Awesome. So it's something I know I'm looking forward to.
Me too.
It should be a lot of fun. So the first episode, I assume, we'll put up at the same time as episode 0?
Yeah, I believe we're going to launch both at the same time, so you can listen through episode 0 here, and jump right in with the Man Trap.
The Man Trap. All right, so that'll probably do it for this episode 0. And go look for the Man Trap.
All right, thanks a lot for listening, guys.